Hey everybody, this is Robot here from Vespa Motorsport and ScooterWest.com. If you're looking for parts or accessories for your modern Vespa scooter, such as this scooter, a classic modern, check us out on the web, ScooterWest.com. So as the title states, the scooter I have here is the Vespa Gran Turismo 200. This is the scooter that started all for the Vespa GTS 300 that's so popular and everybody lusts to have for the modern large frame Vespas. I'm going to go over my thoughts of the scooter. Now that it's 2020, this scooter is quite old, and I want to talk about some of the problems with them and what it's like owning something like this that's over 10 years old and some of the maintenance issues, along with the features and how it rides and how it compares to the Vespa 300, the latest version of the scooter. So back in 2002, Vespa decided they needed to have a large frame Vespa come out to be in addition to the Vespa ET4 that was a huge popular success. This scooter came in two variations in the rest of the world. They had the Gran Turismo 125 and the GT200 or the Gran Turismo 200. In the United States, they only imported the Gran Turismo 200, and they were a few years late. I think it was late 2003, early 2004 when these started to become imported officially into the United States. It was quite ahead of its times. It was the first liquid-cooled Vespa. Even the 125, which I had the opportunity to rent one in London and rode it all over the place, including on the motorways, which I probably had no business being on. It performs great, considering it's a 125 liquid-cooled motor. They all have a 4-valve head. They're all carbureted, which I'll talk about a little bit later. But this is where it started all. It's kind of got pretty much the similar looks to the Vespa GTS 300 that's sold to this day. Obviously, they made a ton of changes, small changes over all the years to bring it to what it is nowadays. But this is where it all started. This was the most popular color for this GT200, classic green here. They were going for more of a neo-modern look to this scooter. It's got this very flush looking horn cover, which was never found on any of the later GT or GTS scooters, you know, the 300s, 250s, and so on. It's got a smooth front fender with no fender crest that they added later. The front end design is pretty much unchanged to today. They've made some improvements to the fork to make it more rigid, but that wheel is identical to what you'd find on a 2020. They never changed the style of it. Kind of shows you how timeless this scooter is. Just the basic alloy 5-spoke wheel. Obviously it comes in different finishes now, but this 2004 model's got the original silver finish wheel. It's got pretty much the same glove box design as they've have all the way up to 2020. Got the 3-position key that locks the steering column. You can push the lock to open up the glove box. One thing about these glove boxes, they're a little larger compared to the latest ABS equipped version because they have no ABS pump. But there's one thing I've always liked about the first generations of this scooter. You go in here, you can see they added some luxury stuff, like there's a carpet padding that's not found on the latest scooter. We got the toolkit, which carries over, it's not in there, but it's got a carpet in there. I always thought that was cool on the early GT200s. Got the plastic bag hook, it's always been there all the way up till today. The handlebar controls are pretty much the same as the latest iteration. Got the basic analog instrumentation. Of course, you got the clock that's out. I'll tell you about that clock. It's powered by a watch battery that's rather difficult. It takes about 25 minutes to change out that battery because you got to dismantle this whole entire cover to get to the back of the speedometer. So most of the time, now that these scooters have aged, that clock is no longer working. Fuel gauge, temperature gauge, some basic lights. It tell you low oil pressure or the turn signal's on. Floorboard is pretty much the same. Battery is in the exact same spot. The GT200s have a different style seat and rear rack arrangement. The rear rack on these scooters is all thermoplastic, like a fiberglass reinforced thermoplastic. It looks cool. I've always liked how these look. It's a very modern looking rack versus the newer racks are just usually tubular chrome metal. It's got 2 grab handles. That's very unique to the Gran Turismo. The smaller seat bucket compared to the ABS equipped newer GTSs. No pet sticker as they've always had. Does include the seat cover from back in the day. Moving on underneath, you got the carbureted liter motor. This is their first generation of the liquid cooled 4-stroke motor. It's a 4-valve engine design. I'll give you all the pluses and minuses of this motor. Obviously it's aged quite a bit, so we know all the problems with these scooters and what the first generation gives you, as you expect from something out of Italy. With Italian stuff, I feel like it just takes years to refine it. The 2020 GTS 300 is brilliant. I think it's quite a reliable scooter. These, now that they've aged, I'll show you some of the stuff you may want to watch for. This has got the original top case that's loved by a lot of Vespa GT and GTS fans because it's got these original like lenses. They went to a newer style top case that it works great, but some people don't quite fall in love with it as much as this top case. Moving on to the taillight. This is a US market taillight. It's got 2 running lights and a single brake light. The European one is got this like, whatever you call the look, the Altezza look, like the Lexus Altezza look. It's a clear lens with a whole ring of little lights and a brake light in the middle. It looks much cooler. You can still buy that taillight. It's a very different taillight. You can't really retrofit the taillights between the 250 and 300 to this because this whole rear end is all designed around this taillight. You'd have to replace all these parts to retrofit the newer style taillight. It's got the license plate light that's integrated in here. Sometimes they do still have the reflector on the rear. This one's missing the reflector, so that piece may have been replaced at some point. US market scooters have 3 reflectors on the rear and 2 in the front. Somebody's added the mud flap. It's got the old school Vespa of California plate frame. You still find those frames on eBay. They're rather valuable. There's a whole series of Vespa boutiques owned by this guy Malamut back in the early 2000s, and you know, since many of them have been closed or been passed on ownership. Kind of a cool little story in its own. But wheelbase, tire size, all that stuff the same as GTS 300. 12-inch tires front and rear. You ask how it performs. Well, being a 200cc motor, the old saying, there's no replacement for displacement. Obviously, you got the new motors that are 300s, or really they're 278s. This is nearly a 200cc. I think it's a 198cc motor. Being carbureted, they're a little thirsty on the fuel. I found these get pretty much the same fuel economy as a larger motor, but they don't quite have the performance of a 300. Fuel tank's a little bit larger because they don't have the fuel pump. I think these hold 2.4 gallons, if I recall. Top speed, guess what? It's faster than a 2020. Top speed on these scooters is about 81 miles an hour, and that's when it hits the rev limiter that's in this Cdi box. And this is a pitfall of the scooter actually here, and that's why this part is on the floorboard. Now I'm going to go into owning one of these scooters pretty much 10 or 15 years later. It's 2020, this is a 2004. Kind of gives you an idea. This is a very clean, low miles example, 3,000 miles on the scooter. But all the stuff you need to do to a scooter of this age, even with very low miles, plus more if you got higher miles or more use on it. Well, first of all, it came in because it was sitting for a while, needed to clean the carburetor out. Pretty typical of a carburetor with the modern feel that has 10 to 15% ethanol. Tends to clog the carburetor up in a few months' time. Like if you don't ride it for 2 months, you're done. You need to clean that carburetor out. But this is the ignition Cdi box, and Vespas, ever since the Vespa ET4, have had an immobilizer system, so there's a chip built into this key. Originally would have had like a master key that was like a brown key, along with this blue key. We're able to clone these keys if you ever need to have a duplicate. This is the only key you had on the scooter. But here's the problem. These boxes are like going out like crazy. In the last week, we replaced 2 of these. There's not that many GT200s going around, but these magnesium Morelli boxes, something inside is failing and they lose spark. And I've seen them lose spark 10, 12 years ago when I was working on them. So I'm not saying it's a major problem, but if it's been replaced with the newer EFI Technologies box or the Melosi box, which is the more popular option, they're highly reliable, the ignition system. Number 2, another pitfall of these scooters is that carburetor and all the fuel lines. All the fuel lines, if they still have the original fuel lines, believe me, even if no fuel went through them, they're deteriorated. You're gonna need to replace all the fuel lines, and these have a complicated fuel system. They got a fuel tap that turns the fuel on and off with a vacuum from the intake manifold. You got a fuel pump, a mechanical fuel pump. It's not mechanical, it's actually vacuum operated, so there's more vacuum lines and another T. You got intake manifold that's made of rubber that's typically deteriorating. So as with the age of one of these scooters, 15 years old, a lot of times you gotta replace the fuel pump, the fuel tap, all the fuel lines, the fuel filter, and the intake manifold, and clean the carburetor. So that's quite a bit of work. In the past, I've done a full, I think a customer just told me, an hour and 20-minute video on how to overhaul this carburetor. And I kind of cover all the fuel lines. And I made that video about a year ago. And a customer told me he watched that video and paused it several times and made sure he fully understood how to rebuild this carburetor. Not an overly complicated carburetor, but it's something that you got to keep in mind. If the scooter's been sitting, you're probably gonna have to clean it. And I would just recommend, if you own something like this and the fuel lines are original, just go in there and replace them. Save yourself the hassle of having a fuel leak. So those are the 2 major pitfalls, is the fuel system, the ignition system, and also being the first generation motor. These kind of had fragile crankshafts. The very early versions of these had aluminum cylinder that was prone to leakage, along with a kind of a weak water pump design that's prone to leakage. Even if they have the newer designed water pump, which I think is somewhere in 2005, they went to the newer style water pump. Just being an older scooter, if you have high miles, you may have a water pump that's maybe leaking, so that may be something you need to service. So one more system on the scooter being water cooled. Water cooled, it's great for longevity and endurance of the engine and getting good power output, but it's one more system that could potentially fail versus an air-cooled, simpler scooter. So keep that in mind, especially considering these have aged quite a bit. Some of the parts that are difficult to get for this scooter are the muffler, and I've seen higher miles examples where the muffler is falling apart or rotting. Brake systems are starting to fail because they have rubber seals, especially if it's left outside. This scooter's obviously been indoors all its life, and the brakes feel great on it, no problems there. The 3 things I like about this scooter and the 3 things I dislike about this scooter, speaking of the scooter in 2020, this is the smoothest version engine they ever made for the large frame Vespa. Once they went to the 250, they vibrate a little bit more. When they went to the 300, they vibrate even a little bit more. Don't get me wrong, those 300s are really, really smooth scooters. But these 200s, they just sound smooth and they're really, really smooth. For some reason, the motors are so smooth on these. On the end of the crankshaft, they have a balancer, like a fluid-filled balancer that they never used on the later motors. The engine mount's pretty much the same. But if you have a clean one like this, that's all perfect, they're so smooth. I think that's pretty neat. Performance-wise, I think they're great considering they're a 200cc scooter. So number 2 on my top likes about the scooter, it's a very comfortable scooter. The seat, for some people prefer the seat over the newer seats. It's a little mushier. I tend to like firm seats. I don't know, just all personal preference. Some people tell me how much they hate seats, and I don't know, I can ride a bicycle all day, so I don't really have much opinion on a lot of seats. But these things are pretty smooth. You know, for the seat, the ergonomics are great. Obviously, all those ergonomics carry over to the latest generation, the 300s. And number 3 would be this scooter. As much as I love fuel injection, it is kind of the last of its breed where you could service it mostly at home. So that might be something important, especially if you're buying one of these in the used market and you're trying to save a little bit of money. You're not looking to spend $8,000 out the door to buy a brand new 300. It's got a carburetor. There's definitely no reason to ever take it to a dealership if you're a good, competent, handy mechanic. Not really the best scooter to be learning on how to wrench on something, but hopefully my videos help you out on the service videos for this. As for my bottom 3 things I do not like about this scooter, it has not aged well, reliability and mechanically. Like I just went over all those issues: fuel lines, fuel pumps, ignition box, water pumps, carburetors. The carburetors even have problems where they break the slides, and the part of the slide, the thing that goes up and down, goes in the engine, it takes out the whole engine. I've seen broken cranks on these. I couldn't give this thing 100% on that reliability scale. Oftentimes, if you have a catastrophic failure on the engine parts aren't exactly easy, nor are they cheap to get. A lot of times you end up scrapping the scooter, and good luck trying to find a motor. They are out there, but you find somebody else's scrappy motor that's used, is probably in bad shape too. You know, and I even noticed one other thing. Like I just moved the steering, I can feel a little roughness in the steering bearings. I know the grease in the steering bearings and the fork, being over 10-year-old grease, that grease is hard, and so something like this, I'd recommend taking it all apart and clean it. It's great if you're a tinker. If you find a clean example like this, you could fix all these little problems. You can have a nice, wonderful scooter. But that reliability, I don't know if I'd trust this thing to go across country, considering it's over 10 years old. I have so many customers that, like, it looks just like the brand new one. I'm like, oh, you don't get it. It's the first generation, 10 years old. First generation Italian vehicle. I'm not picking on Italians or anything in that regard, but they don't always get it perfect on that first iteration. That's just the way it goes. Doesn't matter if you're buying a Fiat 500 or a Vespa. So I see people sometimes severely overpay for these scooters, you know, thinking they're just like the 300, and they aren't. Number 2, you know, being a 200cc, they just don't quite have the torque to really pull those hills. The motor does wind a little harder. Fuel economy is not that great considering this size scooter, you know, engine. You know, that's kind of a downside of it. Number 3, a lot of people are going to hate me on this one. You know, and this is shared across all the large frame Vespas. They're kind of ill proportioned. You know, I'm kind of like a classic Vespa elitist, and I like the small, petite looking Vespas, like the new Sprint and the Primavera. They just like look sharp and everything. These things are kind of bulky, and so they're not for everybody. You know, if you're a short person, they're kind of heavy, you deal with a 300-pound scooter. You can definitely feel the weight, especially if you're a new rider, not used to the weight. They're just not very nimble in town like a much smaller scooter. Although a bunch more nimble than a Bergman or some other huge Bark Lounge scooter. That's like a whole scooter realm in its own class. I don't really cover that. I'm sure there's other people that love those things and talk all about them, but I'm the Vespa guy here. So there's my 3 bottoms of this thing. Other than that, I like this scooter. It's a nice, clean example. I'd love to have this in my collection. Not that I need more Vespas, but there's everything I have to say in my, I don't know how long that video is, like 15-minute, 20-minute video on the Vespa GT200. So whether you're looking to buy one of these in the used market or you already have one and you're just curious about Robot's bullshit opinion on it, hope it helps you out. This is Robot here from Vespa Motorsport and ScooterWest.com. Check us out on the web, ScooterWest.com. If you're in the market for a scooter, VespaMotorsport.com. You can see our inventory. If you already have a scooter, of course you're probably stumbling across this video because you're looking on how to maintain and keep one of these running. I have plenty of videos covering these scooters. Everything from cleaning the carburetors to basic oil changes and tire changes. Just do a search in YouTube and come across all the cool videos on our channel, Vespa Motorsport. Don't forget to subscribe, hit a thumbs up if you think it's a cool video. If you think I slammed the scooter, I don't know, hit a thumbs down, I don't care. Robot here, Vespa Motorsport. Until next time, ride safe.